Welcome everyone. Welcome to our sessions, and I'm Xinyu, here's Richard and Tony, and as you probably know, we're from Android Security from Google. And here's our agenda. The part will focus on the offensive research, and we will talk about the state of Android GPU security, graphics stack, and PowerVR driver, as well as the new thoughts for finding more GPU bugs, and we will also talk about the vulnerabilities in the Sparse texture feature and demonstrate how to root your device in just 10 seconds. The part for two focus on the defensive research, including how Google find vulnerabilities, exploits, and new innovation technologies for detecting routing exploits. And I will also introduce the Android Partner Vulnerability Initiative Program and summarize our findings. So all the vulnerabilities we mentioned in this talk were already either publicly disclosed and patches were available by the affected vendors. So first of all, I would like to talk about the state of Android GPU security. So, well, unfortunately, there are significant attacks targeting Android GPU drivers in the recent years by spyware industry. And to be more specific, about 40% of Android in the Y0-day exploits are GPU exploits over the last 3 years. So, and GPU by design, has to be accessible by privileged applications such as the gaming applications, and this also makes GPU, becomes an easy reachable target attack surface, and that answers why we focus on securing the GPU drivers on Android. So from our point of view, we do believe that GPU security on Android is still vastly under research. There might be a lot of reasons behind that. Like for example, the GPU code could be quite arcane to understand. The GPU commands and instructions are proprietary, and developers always love to introduce more GPU features, and sometimes they do rewrite GPU drivers. From the spyware industry point of view, zero-day market may have a lot of GPU exploits. So, according to the Project Zero blog post about securing Android GPU, the findings by the Project Zero may already collide with the vulnerabilities in the zero-day market. There are three major Android GPU vendors in the ecosystem: the Mali GPU by ARM, the Adreno GPU by Qualcomm, and PowerVR GPU by Imagination Technology. And despite that, there's other GPUs such as Eclipse GPU can be found a very, very specific chipset. So today we're going to focus on the PowerVR GPU by Imagination Technology, and you probably know ImageTech is a British semiconductor and software company based in here in London. So you might already use the PowerVR GPU for years. The iPhone, iPad, Apple TV use PowerVR GPU before Apple replaced it by its own. And now this PowerVR GPU is quite popular on the budget-friendly Android phone, tablet, and TVs. This Samsung Galaxy series, Redmi series, and the Amazon Fire TV use the PowerVR GPUs on the MediaTek or Unisoc SoC. So Imagination Technology also claimed that over 35% of smartphones feature with this GPU, and it has the outstanding presence in the 2021 mobile market, especially on the developing countries such as the India, China, or Russia. So the market research showed that the 3 out of 10 most shipped devices use this GPU in 2021. That's about 100 million devices, and this GPU also has some presence in the developing countries, such as for example, in the United States, Samsung A12, Motorola series, and are quite popular. And these devices, although they're very cheap, and you can probably buy these devices by $99 or maybe less than $200, but it doesn't mean the security of these devices can be completely ignored. So there are limited research about this GPU before 2022, and there's a few public research about this GPU in the past, and a few talks and blog posts about attacking the modern PowerVR driver before 2022. More research has kicked off in 2022. There is a Black Hat user talk about this attack surface, and Google Android security team and Project Zero reports a number of security bugs. And also, researchers also start reporting the PowerVR driver issues to Google this year. So let's dive into the technical part. First of all, we'll talk about the Android graphic stack, focusing on the vendor implementation and driver framework. So why we need to take a look at the graphic stack? So the short answer is there is a number of functionalities implemented by the GPU driver, and some of them are very, arcane to understand. So by looking at the graphic stack in the user mode, we can understand how the OpenGL or VulcanGL APIs are implemented and how these graphic libraries interact with the GPU drivers, and including some proprietary commands. So here's a brief overview of the the Android graphic stack. So essentially, the high-level libraries involve graphic libraries in the system directories, and the system libraries essentially, they invoke vendor libraries, which actually implement all the standard OpenGL, Vulkan APIs, and this is the part we focus on. So these vendor libraries are usually called as the the user mode drivers or the Android game drivers sometimes, and essentially, these drivers interact with the GPU driver, and GPU driver interact with the GPU firmware. So, of course, different GPU vendors may have very different implementation of these standard APIs. So let's take a closer look at the vendor libraries implemented by the image tag. So image tag basically has implements a stateful middleware for implementing all the graphic APIs, including the OpenGL or the Vulkan APIs, and it maintains memory management for CPU or GPU, synthesize user input and current OpenGL state, and also produce a lot of runtime logs, which has the kernel pointers inside. So for instance, if we invoke these OpenGL APIs, the graphic library will essentially establish the CPU and GPU mapping by interacting with the GPU driver. So we can ignore the logic here and switch to the kernel point of view. So the the GPU driver has to allocate a bunch of physical pages and map these physical pages into to the CPU and GPU virtual memory space. So the GPU driver has to expose the tons of API to the user space, and we basically call it as the bridge APIs. To further understand the GPU memory management, so let's take a look. So to map a bunch of physical pages to either CPU or GPU, the first thing to do is to ask the driver to allocate a bunch of physical pages. So the PMR here stands for the physical memory resources, is the critical component for allocating and managing physical memory. So in other words, if we want to free these pages or map these pages to either CPU or GPU virtual memory, you have to interact with these components. And next, for instance, to map physical pages to GPU, you have to establish a GPU MMU context like other GPU and allocate a heap object with specifying the range of GPU memory we want to use in the future. And similar to some Windows allocators, the caller also has to reserve a range of memory inside of the heap memory, as the reserved memory will be committed in establishing the GPU mapping. So for example, we can register the device heap memory inside of the GPU virtual memory space, as you can see in this purple area, and the address 0x8, followed by a bunch of zeros, are the starting address of the so-called general heap areas according to the GPU virtual memory layout. And that means the users can freely read and write this memory space. Since we only want to map part of the device heap memory here from the purple area to the allocated physical pages, and we need to reserve the memory we want to commit in the yellow area. And by passing all the handles, such as the device heap handles, reservation handles, and the PMR handles to the driver APIs, the driver will essentially set up the GPU MMU and map the pages. In addition, we may map physical pages to CPU virtual memory space if the driver allows us to do so according to several memory flags. And similar to other GPU drivers, we can just pass the handles. In this case, is the PMI handle to the mmap syscall to map physical pages to the CPU virtual pages. And so at this point, copy data to the CPU virtual memory is basically equivalent to copy the data to the GPU virtual memory, although different cache policies might apply because the same physical pages has been mapped to the CPU and GPU virtual memory. So since we have reported a bunch of PowerVR bugs in 2022, the question for us is to how to efficiently find more issues on this driver instead of doing all the human code review, because the driver code base is very large, and given there are a number of GPU functionalities, and which functionalities may yield to more security bugs. So as you know, it's not quite easy to understand all sorts of functions implemented by the GPU drivers, and some of them are really arcane to understand. So essentially, for a long time, we don't really know how to chain this API together, and a lot of instructions are proprietary. We don't really know how to trigger more behaviors in the GPU drivers or the firmware. So we basically have two thoughts about digging more vulnerabilities in addition to human code review. So first, we implement instrumentation framework for the vendor graphic libraries with the hope to understand more about this GPU. So for example, we can use the ptrace to monitor the interaction of the GPU drivers in the Hill program. And moreover, to trigger more interactions with driver and firmware, including the GPU shader part, we also build 3 applications by the function hook for intercepting the IOCTL call, which is used for interacting with the GPU driver. So, based on the 3D application, we have a light with fuzzer for the graphic APIs, which help us find several security bugs we missed during the human code review. So basically, this fuzzer mutates all the parameters passed by the graphic APIs from the vendor libraries. Also, it intentionally destroys all a certain kernel object to alter the state of the OpenGL, and also attempt to monitor all the allocated memories on the either CPU or GPU side, and attempt to tamper this memory content. So after a while, you can see the device crash because we intercept certain APIs when joining this teapot, and however, we only get some usual memory corruptions by this approach, and such as some auto-bound read or write and kernel object user free. So sorry. So we also try to read some open GLs or working API documentations with hope to find more interesting undefined behaviors on these documentations. So we start trying to Google about any complaints about the GPU driver crash when you're using certain OpenGL or working API. So surprisingly, developers in the AMD website complain the AMD Windows GPU driver crash if you're using the OpenGL Sparse memory API in some certain scenarios. So in 2019, AMD eventually fixed their GPU driver bug, but this information also makes this research approach look more promising. Like, why not take a look at this OpenGL Sparse memory feature on Android? So let's take a look about the sparse texture memory. So this OpenGL sparse texture API was proposed in 2013 and finalized in 2015 by NVIDIA. It belongs to the OpenGL extension API set, but most of GPU vendors bought it nowadays, such as Qualcomm's, AMD's, NVIDIA, Imagination Technologies. And the new APIs was proposed for implementing the sparse texture memory, and for the last parameter is for either committing or decommitting the sparse texture memory. So why we need this API? So in general, it creates a resource that appears to be larger than the physical memory we allocated, but only has a small portion of that resources actually backed by physical memory. So in other words, we can allocate a bunch of virtual pages, but these virtual pages are only backed by a few physical pages. So as a result, the sparse texture may consume much less memory. This could be something very helpful, especially you're using an entry-level Android device with a very small RAM. So, well, if you don't quite understand how it looks like, here's an example of its low-level implementation. So the driver has to handle all kinds of sparse texture memory requests from the user space. So you have to supply a bunch of arguments such as how many virtual pages you want, and plus all the mapping indexes with other arguments such as the starting GPU virtual address for the sparse texture. So for example, the live diagram here indicates that the virtual page 0 mapped to the physical page 0, and the virtual page 1, 2, 3 mapped to the same physical page 1. So that means if you supply the certain allocation indexes and the starting address of the GPU virtual memory, the driver will handle the allocation request and map the sparse memory looks like this. And if we want to free the virtual page 2 and 3, we can also supply the free indexes with the correct starting address of the GPU's virtual memory, as you can see here. So, well, now let's switch back to the OpenGL documentation. And by looking at the OpenGL documentation, there's actually a lot of documented undefined behavior. So first, if we ask the API to destroy the sparse texture, the texture memory region will be decommitted, and the physical pages will also be deallocated. So the content of these pages will be undefined. And second, read from this uncommitted memory using undefined data. And third, the atomic operation with return value on the free physical pages is undefined. And finally, attempt to write on the free memory will be ignored. And there's actually a lot of undefined behavior documented about this API. So the basic idea is like hey, this API is kind of dangerous because accessing the free memory is surely an undefined behavior. So please don't play with the file. And I mean, this undefined behavior has already warned developers about these dangerous undefined behaviors and how the GPU vendors react when someone is really determined to trigger these undefined behaviors. So the PowerVR driver does have some defense mechanism. So according to the PowerVR developer manual, there's basically 3 steps of using a sparse texture API. So the first step, is to allocate the sparse texture memory. As you can see in this diagram, like we might have multiple GPU virtual pages mapped to the same physical pages according to the current OpenGL context. And next, we can use this OpenGL function to copy the CPU user space memory to the texture-related memory hosted on the GPU virtual memories. So what's under the hood is that the driver will map the physical pages to the new CPU virtual memory, and by copy the data to the mapped to CPU virtual pages is identical to copy the data to the the GPU virtual pages for storing the texture information. And when the copy is complete, the graphic API will unmap the mapped CPU virtual pages, as you can see here. As for the final step, we can call the OpenGL API again to destroy the texture memory. The driver will free the physical pages and unmap GPU virtual memory. So at first glance, there's no security issue at all because the graphic APIs avoid undefined behaviors by unmapping, CPU virtual pages after copy. And if someone really wants to map CPU virtual memory after the sparse memory is destroyed, there's actually no security implication. But here comes up with the idea, like, what if we call the mmap again to map additional CPU pages before the sparse texture memory is destroyed, as you can see here. So we now have another CPU virtual memory mapped to the physical pages here. The driver actually does not expect to have additional extra memory mapping. So when we ask the driver to free the physical pages and unmap all the GPU virtual pages, this CPU mapping still exists. So we can now trigger the undefined behavior in this way. So this is the first page user-free on the CPU side. We introduce this talk. And you can get arbitrary number of freed physical pages you want. So in short, it's a logic bug, and driver developers have to take care of any unexpected memory mappings. Unfortunately, there's other issues in the low-level implementations. First, the driver does not seem to validate arguments from the user space very well, including the mapping indexes. So it basically leads to several outbound issues, and we might be able to map arbitrary physical pages due to an outbound access. And secondly, the reference command issue happens a lot across the Java code base, including the sparse memory texture. So the sparse memory uses the physical memory resources or the PMR object for accessing all the physical memories, but the driver developers forgot to honor the object reference count. So that means a malicious user may free these physical memories because of the reference count management issue, and we can get the pages free by the GPU virtual memory because they are still mapped to the freed physical pages. The third problem is due to the start GPU virtual address supplied to the GPU kernel function. So in theory, the OpenGL context implemented by the graphical vendor libraries keep track of the starting address of the GPU virtual memory used for the sparse texture. So therefore, when our graphic libraries ask the driver to destroy the sparse texture, as you can see in this diagram, the graphic library has to supply the correct starting address of the GPU virtual memory to the driver, so the driver will unmap these GPU virtual pages and free the physical pages. But I mean, a malicious user can also talk to the GPU driver directly and supply the wrong GPU virtual memory. As you can see here, if we supply the wrong GPU memory, the driver will still free the physical pages and unmap these wrong GPU pages. So the GPU page table could be corrupted because either it unmap wrong or invalid GPU pages. However, the driver does not want to handle this scenario, but just complain about an unexpected situation. So therefore, since the GPU virtual memories in the purple area still map to the freed physical pages, we can now access freed physical pages from these GPU virtual memory. So there are other interesting ways to corrupt the GPU page tables by sparse memory bridge APIs or other APIs. Like according to the PowerVR GPU virtual memory layout, there's a general heap area and the general non-4K areas. As you can see here, it's kind of weird. So why we have a memory section that's called as non-4K? So after some research, the PowerVR GPU actually has a very fancy page table setup, as they support different kinds of page granularity. So one of the ideas for corrupting the page table is to supply the different page granularity and causing out of bounds in managing the page table. So as a result, the CPU or GPU may access to unexpected physical pages due to out-of-bound access. So for example, we can set up the memory reservations with the granularity as 4K, but we can also ask the driver to map this GPU page as the 16K page size. And because of the inconsistency of the page size, the GPU page table will eventually be corrupted, and we can map or unmap, arbitrary physical memory we want. Unfortunately, this buggy sparse texture feature is probably introduced a long time ago. For example, the PowerVR GPU with this buggy feature can be traced back in 2014 on Android 5, and some of our other findings also exist very long time ago. So, as someone comments on the per-zero findings about the GPU drivers, certain GPU features were there forever, but nobody really wants to report these issues for a very long time to the vendors. So at least this problem will finally identified, and we are on the track for securing the affected devices. At the final chapter of the offensive part, so we will discuss how to root device by page user free. So first, to overcome the driver version fragmentations, we can just use the graphic APIs plus the actual mmap function to trigger the page user free, and also make exploit more difficult to detect, as we can, blend the malicious code inside our 3D game app with normal usage of graphic APIs. There are also a number of ways to root device and bypass any hypervisor-based kernel protection systems, and this time we choose to attack the device by attacking the page table. And we can essentially let a user-based program read and write the entire physical memory. And I mean, for sure, there's also lots of other methods to compromise the device. And unlike traditional memory corruption, such as write-out bounds or read-out bounds or user-free in certain kernel objects, we probably have the best exploit primitive, as we can read and write arbitrary physical pages we want from the either CPU side or GPU side by OpenCL. And unlike some other page user-free bug from PowerVR or multi-GPU, which requires to trigger additional conditions, getting user-free pages by sparse texture is just very straightforward. So as for the POC, first, the exploit attempt to split the page table by a map. The exploit primitive essentially allows us to find the right PT to tamper by the memory copy on write mechanism. So the exploit is able to control that PT to read and write arbitrary physical memory. And there's actually no kernel mitigation can stop us compromising the kernel, as we can freely read write the entire physical memory we want. Like, for example, the CFI stands for the control flow integrity, cannot defend this type of vulnerability because we can simply patch the CFI code in the kernel, and we can dump the entire physical memory, including the entire kernel image, and we can alter any memory we want. So the exploit is very, very stable, and all you need to do is to wait and get a root shell. So let's take a look at the POC. So as you can see, they actually managed to turn off the SE Linux and get a root shell by reading and writing the device physical memory. And to sum up about the offensive part, undefined behavior could be very, very scary, and meeting the basic requirements of OpenGL documentation does not mean the implementation is secure. And thank you, everyone. Now welcome Richard for the defensive part. Thanks.
Thanks, Xingyu. Oops. Okay, so, excuse me, finding vulnerabilities. Reading source code and standards documentation still seems to work pretty well, suggesting there's a bit of a tooling gap in driver development. There is software available to help you query and scan source code for vulnerabilities. Perhaps we should be trying to use that a bit more. Looking for gaps in standards documentation is probably more difficult, but whilst you can literally just search for undefined behavior and find interesting things, we probably don't need to be too more advanced yet. We are still using fuzzing to find issues, as well as then using fuzzing to help develop and stabilize the exploits. Another way of finding vulnerabilities is to find exploits written by other people and then work out what they're exploiting. Not everybody who finds vulnerabilities reports them. Some people sell them, and obviously governments and their contractors do their own research to maintain capability. This is probably the most interesting way of finding vulnerabilities, so we'll look at this a little bit more. Thinking about other people writing exploits, Pegasus on iOS gets a lot of media attention. We assume there is similar capability available for Android as well. There's also people who are less technically skilled than NSO Group, or who simply don't care so much about being caught. If you're using N days rather than 0 days, you're not losing so much value if you get caught and analyzed. Tony will talk a bit more about N days later. I've said before that I don't think people are packaging exploits into Android applications and putting them into play. Privilege elevation exploits are getting dynamically downloaded following the remote code execution. I still think this is mostly true, but every now and again we find something that contradicts me. Attackers are certainly putting applications into play that they want to run post-exploitation when they're able to silently grant all the permissions for the application. The apps shown here are from state-sponsored attackers, and here's an example of code they use to grant all the permissions to the process after the exploitation. Equally, some organizations doing post-incident response tell us they see a lot of payloads which are single ELF executable files. We collect applications and executables from the internet and other sources and put them through a variety of analysis. We write signatures looking for vulnerabilities and exploits based off either contents we've seen in files or looking for certain behaviors we've either seen or we think we might see. Here you can see some example source code doing a version check in order to set up parameters for exploitation. And on the right-hand side, you can see the automated analysis view of the control flow, all of the struct humps. Sometimes we capture third-party exploits, and sometimes we capture internal binaries written by other teams who are investigating vulnerability reports. There's a lot of ways to obfuscate code against static analysis, though, so we continue to do a lot with dynamic analysis. If an executable has obfuscated strings, for example, when we emulate it, we dump out all of the strings we can see past the APIs. This saves us finding and reverse engineering the obfuscation code at the cost of needing the binary to actually do something. Obviously, we control the environment, so that's helpful, and we can use eBPF to see all of those nice open and IOCTL calls going to the drivers. There's also impossible conditions. On Android, for example, there are no legitimate ways to go back from an application UID up to UID 0. When Zygote starts an application, it will fork, it will change to the application UID, but you can't go back the other way. So if you can see this happen, somebody's achieved the impossible, or more accurately, found some kind of vulnerability that allowed them to manipulate kernel state. We'll come back to that in a second. Stopping exploitation. IT security industry has done a lot of things over the years. A recent thing that's now available, ARM's memory tagging extension. Project Zero's Mark Brand has even gone and bought a device with MTE enabled because he thinks it's going to be such a great new protection. Memory corruption-related exploitation is going to become a lot less reliable with MTE. Similarly, the Android platform security team is recommending all new features be developed using Rust instead of C++. Some existing features are also being ported. This will help, again, with memory safety. If you're an OEM writing device drivers, there's some material on Google's OEM portal looking at vulnerable code patterns we've seen in C, in drivers written in C. We're hoping to add more information to this over time, so please take a look. I did mention detecting impossible conditions. If you can see an impossible condition happening, what can you do with it? So here, hopefully, we've got two terminals onto my test device running a GPU exploit. This is going to get a root shell. I will then use that root shell to load a kernel module. So the first exploit should complete about now. So we've got the root shell. insert the kernel module, just check it's loaded. We'll then run the exploit again in the second terminal. This exploit won't complete. It will get most of the way through, outputting very similar data, but will then appear to hang. We will switch back to the other terminal and check the kernel logs about now, and we will see that we detected the process changing its UID and elevating itself. The trick here is doing this fast enough to be able to take action before the attacker can do whatever they wanted to do, or indeed stopping the attacker using the vulnerability from breaking the detection code before they do the privilege elevation. And with that, I will hand over to Tony, who will talk some more about fixing all these things.
Thank you, Richard. So let's go ahead and jump right in to probably the most divisive Android headline of the last couple years. The quote comes from Maddie Stone, Android security team and Project Zero alumna. For those that don't know, I'm not Maddie Stone. Maddie is much cooler than I am. I'm Tony Mendez, and I'm the lead technical program manager for third-party vulnerability management on the Android security team. That's a mouthful. What does it mean? It means when someone says something like this, they're very much taking a shot in my general direction. Joking aside, though, it's a valid criticism. So what are we doing about it? And the answer is a lot. We have multiple projects, multiple programs. We have the Google Play Security Reward Program, which pays out bug bounties for non-Google authored apps on the Play Store. We have the Developer Data Protection Program, which helps mitigate data abuse issues, again, for apps, popular apps on the Play Store. And in the trifecta, the crown jewel is the Android Partner Vulnerability Initiative, which is today's focus. So for those that aren't aware, the Android Partner Vulnerability Initiative has been around since about 2020, and it's the vehicle by which Googlers are able to do security research on third-party OEMs. We work with these key partners to address security vulnerabilities in their code base. For those that don't know, Android is an open source operating system which anybody can fork and then go on it and modify. However, if you want to preload to the Play Store and have the apps available to your downstream customers, you have to sign certain agreements, such as the Mobile Application Distribution Agreement. There's other ones as well. And they basically have rules that stipulate you will work with the Android security team to address any security vulnerabilities raised in your code base. So we work with them to responsibly disclose details according to Google's security disclosure policy. So what have we found through these programs over the last few years? A lot. Just focusing on 2023 alone, 30 vulnerabilities have been disclosed through AppV. For those following at home, there's the URL right there. That's where you can go and get your proof of concept code, your exploit code, all the fun like vulnerabilities used after free bugs we weren't able to get to today. We publicly disclose all of that, and where we point to where vendors make their patches available as well. So closing the gap, what can we do about it going forward? For the developers in the room, for OEMs in the room, and for those at home, just continuously improving your vulnerability mitigation pipeline. What does that look like? It can be as simple as security at. Where does security at your company email address go? If you don't receive it, does the person that receive it know to get it to your team? Is your company registered as a CVE numbering authority, aka a CNA? The lower barrier to entry that researchers can reach you about these features, the more likely they are to report it. For the security researchers in the room, over 40% of zero-day vulnerabilities are variants. This is true across the board. So I think the research that we make available via AppV is a good place to start if this area of research interests you. There's a lot of work and already done here to stand on the shoulders of giants. I think within the next year, it would be very cool if we see remote code execution exploiting remotely by WebGL or WebGPU. That would be good research to base off of what we've made available. And again, there's going to be more to come next year. If you have any feedback, if you're interested, we're in the early talks of possibly opening APVI, the Android Partner Vulnerability Initiative, to the public. If that's something you'd like to see, feel free to reach out to us. It's apvi@google.com. And other than that, thank you for coming to today's talk. We're short on time, so if you have any questions, we'll be in the hall to the right. We're happy to take them. We'll be around the conference the next couple of days. And yeah, thank you for coming to our talk, everybody.